Started. Welcome, everybody, on behalf of the Women's Business Development Center. Welcome, everyone, to the third of our three-part series called The Show Goes On, and it's our succession planning workshop series. The first week we had was a focus on just kind of general succession planning topics. Last week was about ESOPs, and today we're going to cover two kind of basically unrelated topics. So we're going to have kind of two for the price of one here. And we're going to start with really important insurance topics that we want to talk about. And I know that most people would rather have their fingers chopped off than talk about insurance, but I'm glad that you are here for that because it really is important to be able to kind of control your destiny. And then the second topic that we'll be talking about is certification. And the ramifications or the ramifications for certification when you're talking about transitioning ownership. So for our first topic here, I would like to introduce Jenny Gimza. Jenny serves as a financial advisor and head of WealthSpire Advisors Madison, Wisconsin office. With over 15 years of experience in the high net worth management space, wealth management space, she brings an extensive financial planning background and prioritizes the highest level of client service standards. She's held the Certified Financial Planning designation since 2012 and acquired the Certified Exit Planning Advisor designation this year. She's also been a member of the board of directors of Big Brothers Big Sisters of Dane County since 2012 and has served as treasurer and head of the finance committee for that organization since 2021. Jenny comes to us via our partners at Aon Insurance, but Jenny wanted to make sure to let folks know that she does not sell insurance. And so when she's talking about insurance, she can kind of get people pointed in the right direction, but her point here is not to sell it. Her point here is to maybe sell the concept of it, to make sure that you know why it's important. What I'd like to do procedurally is Jenny's going to talk about several different topics. If you have questions during this time, you can either put them in the chat or when we get to the end of this insurance topic, then we'll have Jenny answer those questions and then we'll move on to the certification topic. So I am just going to ask Jenny to take it away.
Great. Thank you, Karen. Happy to be here. And as Karen mentioned, not an insurance salesperson by any means, but being in the financial planning industry for 15 years, it's certainly something that needs to be addressed in almost any situation. But for those of you who are here, obviously it's because you've built or owned something incredibly valuable, your business. You've probably put a lot of blood, sweat, tears, time into that business, and we don't want to lose it to something that potentially could have been mitigated or insured that loss away. An example to think about it is through life insurance. Everybody has a basic idea of what a life insurance policy is. Do we see a 23-year-old who rents an apartment, unmarried, no children, buying $500,000, $1 million life insurance policies? Not usually. They might have a $25,000, $50,000 policy that their parents bought for them, but they don't have anything to protect at this point. They don't own a home. They don't have children to get through college. They don't have a spouse to help pay a mortgage through cash flow. So it's not necessarily a need. So really, and thinking about this from the business exit planning strategy, and even if you're not in the business exit planning strategy phase, it's how do you protect the business? So a stat that I have heard is that usually 80 to 90% of a business owner's net worth is locked up in their business. So this goes beyond the business worth to you. It's a personal consideration that you have to think about as well. Within that business, many times as much as 80% of that value, I know the first session of this spent a lot of time talking about valuing your business, but a lot of that is due to intangibles. Your people, your culture, your processes, or your structure, and your customers. Now, once you've found a way to work with those valuation experts to value that business, protecting it is where that valuation number becomes valuable from this perspective. You can't mitigate all risks, but it's understanding what you can mitigate and find ways to do that. Only until then should you really focus on growing or building your business. Now that's usually the first thing everybody thinks about as a business owner is I gotta sell things, I gotta bring money in the door, I have to pay the bills. But once it kind of back to that life insurance example, if you've built something, if you have something to protect, you want to protect it before you continue to grow upon that. So save that foundation, protect it, and it makes the growth phase quite a bit more exciting as well when you don't have to worry about what you could lose.
So Jenny, you've kind of talked about why insurance is important. One of the concepts that, well, one of the previous speakers in an earlier session made the comment that all businesses will transition at some point, right? Whether you plan to do it or it's done the way you wanted to do it, or just some unfortunate thing happens. Can you talk about what a buy-sell agreement is and in the context of what is an insured buy-sell? What does that mean?
Yes. So a buy-sell agreement on its own is more a contract. That depending on the makeup of your business could be between you and a partner, you and other key owners, you and family members, if there's family members or children that might take over the business. But the buy-sell agreement itself is just that, it's the contract. But what helps fund or enact a buy-sell agreement is usually done via an insurance or life insurance contract or life insurance policy. These can be structured many different ways. So I would highly suggest working with an attorney if you're going to consider this disclosure. But as far as the logistics of how this works, if you are a dual partnership, for example, you and a partner each own 50% of a business. We'll stick with simple numbers. And the concern is what happens if one of you were to either become disabled, because this isn't just an exiting the business thing. It could become disabled. Personally have financial bankruptcy concerns that something like that could happen. But then most obviously, what if something were to happen to you from you were to pass away? If your value or equity in this business is $5 million, how does that partner take over your interest? Do they have $5 million sitting in the bank to buy you out? Maybe, possibly, probably not. By having a life insurance policy in place, and again, you can do this a number of ways, but partner B could take out a life insurance policy, or partner A could take out a life insurance policy and name partner B as the beneficiary of that policy. So if they were to pass away, partner B gets $5 million or whatever, depends on the valuation. That's why the valuation of the business is important, to be able to then buy out that partner A and continue to function that business continuously. So always talk about the continuity of the business. So you don't have to worry about disruptions if you have things like this in place. You can also structure it where the entity owns that policy. So sometimes this is good. You don't have to worry about person A or B not paying their premiums on that policy and having it lapse. So a lot of times this is where an organization might mitigate that risk, is have the entity own the policy. From an estate planning perspective, not to get too into the weeds, but if partner A owned that policy on their own and passed away, the value of that policy still ends up in their estate. So if you have estate concerns, which we can get into those limits maybe a little later, another reason to have the entity on the policy is it would get it out of your estate. They own the policy, they pay the premiums. Then if you were to pass away, the entity is the beneficiary. The entity can buy out your 5 million shares. And again, the business can continue to function normally. These can also happen with family businesses passing along. You want to pass the business along to a son or daughter, but you need some sort of value to make your situation, if you leave the business, you can't just give it away, for instance. You need some sort of value to let your lifestyle continue. Or if something were to happen to you, how do they get that? You can go into just key person insurance. Maybe your son or daughter is great at the books, but couldn't do the sales, and you were the salesperson. They might need to hire a salesperson. Give them the liquidity to do that. Could go on and on with many of these examples, but wanted to just walk through a few. But again, knowing the different ways and the different options, if any of these sound like they could work for the business, I'd highly encourage you to talk to an attorney and or an insurance salesperson to be able to help you execute those.
And certainly for businesses that are that the value of the company is high enough that it exceeds some of the caps in oh dear, now I've just lost it, in the
The
tax estate
estate.
taxes. Thank
Yep.
you. I mean, because I have been in communities where businesses of some size, the owner passes away without any kind of ability for the family to pay the estate tax. And so the businesses end up being liquidated because there was no planning. The estate tax, there's nobody to run the business, whatever. And is that another use case for
Yes.
insurance potentially? Yeah, yeah.
It absolutely is. So you're right. Right now, just for reference, for 2024, the estate tax limit is at 13,610,000. At the end of 2026, that is set to sunset. Now we did get a little clarity with the election on because there were some vastly different views on what that might look like depending on who was elected, and the likelihood that that goes down is probably a little bit mitigated with Trump having won. But it is projected to go down to just over 7 million in 2026 at this given point in time. Little unlikely that that happens, but to be determined. So again, if you are above that, estate tax rates are incredibly high, 37% usually plus. So you're giving a good portion of that business straight to the government for your estate that's above that point. If you have a life insurance policy in place upon your death, it can create the liquidity to pay that estate tax for your beneficiaries so they do not have to sell the business in order to do so. So you're absolutely right.
Thank you. Um, so another type of insurance, if I own a business and I'm selling it, then I'm going to make representations and warranties to the buyer, and the buyer's going to make representations and warranties to me. And those are usually called reps and warranties, right? And so there's an insurance component to that process. Jenny, can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Sure. So prior to reps and warranties coverage, there were traditional indemnity agreements that buyers and sellers would use to exchange the business, and basically what that means is um, the seller is selling the business to a buyer, expecting them to disclose everything that should and needs to be disclosed. But if they didn't and they find something wrong, or you sold us this $5 million machine that didn't work, they can come after the buyer and say they misrepresented the deal. So there were indemnity agreements in the past that would escrow a certain amount of the sale of the business, usually 10 to 15%, which would minimize the amount of cash available to the seller upon close. They'd have to wait a certain number of years to get the rest of that money to prove they didn't misrepresent anything in the sale. So what reps and warranties insurance does is basically replace that. It brings an insurance company into the mix and says, and this can be used between both strategic buyers and private equity buyers. They typically limit the amount of that coverage to about 10% of the sale of the business. Keep hearing the value of the business. So these are all many different reasons to be able to do that valuation and have an idea of the value of the business. They also are usually in place a little bit longer than these traditional indemnity agreements. Instead of a year or two, they're usually in place for like 3 to 6 years. Provides benefits to both the buyer and seller. The bid is more attractive to the seller if there isn't money in escrow. It extends that time frame, and for the seller, it reduces that seller's indemnity for a breach if something happens, whether known or unknown. And again, it gives them a cleaner exit. They don't have to wait a number of years to do this. So usually for that, an insurer will charge about 2 to 3% of the coverage limit. So if it's a $10 million business, you're insuring 10% of that, that's about $1 million. The insurance company will charge 2 to 3% of that $1 million in order to hold the coverage for you.
Is that insurance typically obtained by the buyer or the seller or both, or how does
It can
that
be
work?
either.
Okay.
It can be either. Because it provides benefits for both. So it could make a business a bit more attractive as well if you have it, because again, it protects both in different ways. One, cleaner exit for the seller, and it'll make the buyer feel better that you have a policy in place. So it makes your business more attractive.
Okay, thank you. When you and I were talking about this prior to the program, You had brought up something called excess personal liability that I had never considered. But can you kind of talk about what that is and then just some of the value of the insurance for it?
Yeah, it's kind of like a super umbrella policy. Um, to put it in some perspective, everybody's probably familiar with an umbrella policy. You have your auto insurance, your homeowner's insurance, and then sometimes you get an umbrella policy to just cover anything outside of what that might cover. Somebody falls on your walkway and sues you, that's where an umbrella policy would kick in. In this case, this is something that goes above, again, similar to umbrella, above an auto or a homeowner's policy or a watercraft policy or wherever it might be. It goes above that. There will be requirements for certain deductibles and things you'll have to have, but they're pretty standard. It's not going to make you pay incredibly higher premiums or deductibles or out of pockets or anything. But it's additional coverage, and it's usually purchased in more of a group type setting, which brings the cost down. So for instance, our company through NFP has group coverage that available to our personal clients. But it's group, so it's cheaper. We've priced it out like a $10 million policy through this group coverage has historically been quite a bit cheaper than the client looking at their personal insurance and getting $10 million of umbrella because it's considered group. It's worldwide excess liability coverage, covers personal injury, libel, and slander. Depending on how big your business is or how much you're out there, you never know what things could come up. Exceeds limits of underlying auto, homeowners, and watercraft, can cover legal and related defense costs. And for those who may be looking to fulfill something after selling a business, if you're a director on a nonprofit or something, it, with some limitations, covers directors and officers liability. So I know I looked into this being on the board of directors. You heard in my intro. Unfortunately, it doesn't cover me because it involves children. Anytime the organization involves children, they won't cover it. So again, some exceptions to that, but otherwise, if you're on a board, it can provide some liability there. Determining how much you need, where I think this is really interesting and specific to business owners, is what are you worth? When I've talked to the rep who sells this, they use the very technical term of how Googleable are you? If somebody could look up and see that you just sold a business on Google for $20 million and you hit them with your car, they might try to sue you for $20 million. That might be what you'd want to get coverage for. If they know you are worth something, if there's something out on Google they could find about your value, you want to protect that. And let's see, we also look at how risky are you? If you live on the water and have multiple jet skis and boats, those just tend to have a lot higher risk associated with them. It creates the amount of coverage that you might want to have outside of just typical umbrella coverage available.
Thank you. Yeah, I had not thought about if somebody, or it might not even say that, you sold your business for $20 million. It might just say you sold your business and then everybody just assumes that you are swimming in
Exactly.
cash. Because of course, all business owners are incredibly wealthy, as I'm sure all of the people on this call would just, feel that they are billionaires because they own a business. So, but it is something that's worth thinking about to protect yourself if that, if you've got some assets and someone might want to take them. And then the last topic, Jenny, is long-term care insurance. And so can you maybe just speak briefly about that, particularly in the context of the sale of a business?
Right. And, as we had talked about a little bit ahead of time, I'm not here to do a long-term care insurance, but I do think long-term care insurance has evolved a lot, and not everybody is familiar with how it's evolved and how they've made it a lot more attractive to the average person. Meaning, some of the misnomers about typical long-term care is, well, I'm going to pay this premium when I'm 40 or 50, and it's just going to incrementally get higher as I get close. I have 30, 40 years before I might have to use it. And it's going to go up on me every year. It's so expensive. Or if I don't end up using it, I could pay into it for 30 years. And if I don't need it, I just lose it. So they've really worked to kind of hinder those two. That's what dissuaded everybody from buying it. So now there are what they call hybrid policies, which have a long-term care and a life insurance mix with them. So you could buy a long-term care policy, but if you never use it, it pays out a tax-free death benefit to your heirs. So it's something that you pay into that can still benefit your family or your heirs in some way if you do never have to use it for long-term care. There are also ways to do a one-time or a 5, 7, 10 year lump sum premium of some sort. So if you do come into a stream of cash and want to just do a lump sum to protect, again, this big nest egg that you potentially have built, sold, and don't want to give it all to a nursing home someday, take a lump sum. You can put it into a one-time premium. They have actuaries that figure out exactly what that would turn into from a benefit perspective. And also, if you end up not using it, it grows at a modest rate of return and you potentially have return of premium available. So you could get your money out if you ended up not needing it for long-term care and needed it for something else. But again, if not, it could pass on as a tax-free death benefit to your heirs. They've also become required via regulations to cover everything that they should. So it's now not just, it's only if you go into a nursing home. Now they have to cover home health care, adult daycare, assisted living. So things that are much more common these days for people who want to stay in their home or the families want to take care of them, there is long-term care coverage available for those. And those lump sum premiums a lot of times are very, very good leverage ways to access it.
Thank you. That's helpful. I have an aunt who, as it turns out, has a long-term care policy, and that is very helpful in allowing her to be in the kind of environment that she needs to be in to be safe and healthy. So yeah. Does anyone have any questions about any of the insurance topics? Jenny's talked about the importance of an insured buy sell agreement so that if something unforeseen happens to a business partner or the entire owner, that you have the liquidity to either buy out your partner or pay the taxes or keep the business running or hire a salesperson or whatever, a number of the cases that she mentioned. The insurance to cover basically the ensuring the transaction, the representations and warranties, reps and warranties insurance, talking about kind of the excess personal liability umbrella policy, so that if somebody discovers that you are worth a fair amount of money and your car runs into their car, whatever, you can have some more protection there. And then also long-term care insurance, particularly with maybe being able to have a kind of a one-time type of premium for that. Okay. Well, this is super informative and I really appreciate it, Jenny. As I kind of implied at the beginning, this section will also be put on our website, so people will be able to look at it in the future as well. Oh, it looks like one of the people here is saying that she currently has those coverages, so that's great. It's good to have people plan ahead. So, Jenny, thank you so much. I am going to go ahead and remove you, and I am going to replace you with our Director of Certification at the Women's Business Development Center, Bridget Foster. And so Bridget is also in our Chicago headquarters office. Bridget has been the Director of Certification for the WBDC since 2018. Yeah. Has been with the WBDC in the certification program for a number of years before that. And when we say certification at the WBDC, we mean the WBENC, Women's Business Enterprise National Council certification. Some of what we're talking about may have broader implications for maybe state, local certifications. And so if people have questions about those things, we can also do our best to answer those questions. Bridget, so somebody is certified, their business is currently certified, and they want to, and let's assume that they've been certified for a long time, okay? Because many of our WBEs who are transitioning ownership have been certified for a long time. And they want to keep the business certified and they're selling to, I guess let's start with what are the things they need to think about generally? Because I think sometimes people have been certified for so long, they forget about the basics. So let's maybe just refresh on the basics of what it takes to be a certified WBE. Yeah.
Well, to be a WBENC WBE, we look at that the female has at least 51%. She needs to own, control, operate and manage the business. At least 51%. So this means that she has to have unrestricted control of the business. It means she has to show a demonstrated management of the day-to-day operations and a proportionate investment of capital or expertise. Those are the key things. But, then we have to look at what type of business are we talking about? Are we talking about a corporation? Are we talking about an LLC? Because we need to look at all of the documents and the governance and to make sure that, in fact, that the woman is unrestricted in any way of making critical decisions for her business.
Okay, so it is more than just ownership.
It is definitely more than ownership.
One of the things that that I think we see a fair amount is, let's just say that I own 100% of the business, and I've owned 100% of the business for a long time. And then I am going to sell the business to my niece and my nephew. Okay, and my niece is going to have 60% and my nephew is going to have 40%. So in that, let's just use that as an example. What would be the kind of things that we would look at from a certification perspective if I just called in and said, Bridget, this is what I'm going to do. So tell me what I need to be thinking about.
Well, if someone called me, what I would advise them is, before you go ahead with this, tell me how critical this certification is to your business. And if you tell me it's very critical, I have these contracts and I don't want any kind of lapse or anything, then I would say, well, I think the best way to handle this, because if she's 100% owner and she wants to sell her business to someone that doesn't have any ownership in it right now, the new owner would have to start over as a new applicant. We would, once they let us know, we would have to decertify this company because this is a whole new owner. It would be like a whole new application. So what I would advise her to do is to consider, instead of selling it right away, the 60-40, I would say she could consider maybe selling anywhere 1%, 2%, 3%, however she wants to do, to the female. So as long as that female has at least 1% of the company, when the majority female owner wants to then do this big change, 60-40, it will just be a material change. She won't have to start over as a new, the new owner won't have to start over as a new applicant because she has at least that 1%.
So it really, so then what I would do is I would want to transfer, let's just say 1% to my niece. I mean, the nephew's kind of irrelevant at that point. So my niece, Danny, is then going to have 1% of the business. So then it's 99 Karen, 1% Danny, or maybe it's 98 Karen, 1% Danny, 1%, my nephew, whatever. And then we take that through our committee, right, and approve that, because we have to, Danny has to, provide her resume, proof she's female, proof of her citizenship status. And then that goes through, so that takes about a month. And then then I can finish it, right? Then I can complete the transaction and do 59% to Danny and 40% to my nephew, or whatever it's going to be.
Right. So when she transfers the 1%, she would send us a material change request through the system in the WeBank. We would review, like you say, the paperwork. We would, look at her resume. We would do all that. It would go to committee. It would get approved. We would update the ownership information on the certification, and it would be fine. And now once she has that 1%, the 99% owner can, next time around, say, okay, I'm going to give the next 59% to her.
Yeah.
And then bring in Danny. They sent us another material change request. Now we're going to obviously ask for some information as well. We want to know what Danny's involvement's going to be. If Danny has that much, we want his resume. We're gonna look to see what experience Danny has versus the female owner. We just, because we do look at that, and we want to make sure that she's gonna, like, those three buckets we talked about,
Right.
the ownership, the control, and the management, that the female is the one that isn't, that has all those three buckets. And
Yep. And
if that is the case,
Mhm.
then there would be no break in the certification, and we can just make those changes.
Yeah. And so that's what I wanted. And I probably shouldn't have brought up the nephew piece at this point. And Danny, just to be clear, is my niece. But so because it is more than just ownership, right? So I clearly know all about this business because I've been running it for 30 years or whatever. And so let's talk about a little bit more, Bridget. And you mentioned this. So the new female owner, we need to make sure that she knows enough about the industry that she can run the business, right? I mean, so it is her
Absolutely.
resume, understanding her background, her role in the business, maybe currently, or if there's not a role in the business currently, at least her role in the industry.
Right. If there are any key licenses, like an architecture license, does she hold it? Not all licenses does the female owner have to hold, but there are some that she does. But what we look for is that she doesn't necessarily, if it's a let's see what kind of company, some kind of plumbing company, and they work in big contracts, she doesn't necessarily have to go out and do all the bids,
Plumbing,
but
yeah.
she should understand how the bids are made, and because we will ask her to describe a bid process to us, because like anything, I can own a plumbing company. I don't have to do the actual work, but in order for me to be successful, I have to understand who I hire can do the work. So we want the female owner to have knowledge of the business,
Yeah.
because she needs to have that.
And then there are a few industries, as you pointed out, that the female owner must have the license. Architecture is one of them.
A broker.
If you're in the insurance
Real
or
estate.
real estate industry, you have to be the broker. You can't have to work for a managing broker. And that's because you need those licenses in order to be independent, right, of a male-owned business.
Right.
So what about highest title? So what happens if I sell the business to a woman, whoever, and she's, knows about the business and everything, but I also want to uh, hire a new CEO, and that CEO is going to be a male. So how do those things all get involved here?
That may be a problem. And that because a female, I should say, has to have the highest title, not necessarily the female owner, but a female needs to have the highest defined title. And where are we going to look at that? We're going to look at the governance, whether it's, we're going to look at the bylaws, and what is the highest title? What is the highest title that's defined in there? And if the female owner hires a CEO and the CEO is listed as the highest title, that's a problem.
Yeah.
And it, it just wouldn't pass what the standards that WBEDC has.
Right.
That would be a denial.
And you also mentioned the legal control piece. And what we see a lot of times is frequently this is in a transitional phase. Let's say that I've owned 100% of it for a long time, but I want to get some liquidity. So I, find a private equity fund that wants to come in and, give me a bunch of money for 49% of the business. So when we say legal control, what are we talking about there? I mean, how could that be potentially an issue with what I just proposed?
Well, in what you just proposed, and we've seen this, is that a lot of those private equity want a say, obviously, or they want to, in order for the business to do certain things. And if that restricts the woman business owner from getting a loan or like if she needs approval from the private equity group, that's going to be a problem.
Right.
So, if, I mean, in some cases it works, but we would have to really read all the documents that they send, that provide for us about what the responsibilities and the private equity group, what are their what is it they're looking for? And if it restricts the female owner in any way, such as that, it just wouldn't work for this certification. It might work for you in your business, but it just would not work for the WBEE certification.
Yeah. I mean, there's really, the way I kind of oversimplify it, 3 areas where the minority owner gets a vote. And so I think of those. The first one is bringing in new investors or new owners. So, and WeBank would consider the minority owner having a vote in that respect to be fine. The second is shutting the business down, not selling the business, but shutting the business down. We're done with this business. We're just closing it up. We're going to liquidate assets and we're all going to go our merry way. And the third would be amending the bylaws or operating agreement. But really beyond those 3 areas, that the woman owner needs to be able to, as you said, borrow money. I mean, and it's common, as Bridget said, and I'm just going to repeat what Bridget said because it's really important. It's common in kind of the private equity or investor world that the minority owner, even though they're a minority, and by minority, I mean, of course, 49% or less, not racial or ethnic minority, even though they're, a male owner or a non-female owner, gets kind of super majority vote or something. So you'd need 2/3 of the shareholders to approve a transaction in order to borrow money or what have you. Well, in that instance, if I only own 51% and the non-female owner, whether that's a person or a private equity group or whoever, would need to approve it, and therefore I don't have that control as the woman owner. So I think that's a really important piece to understand. I'm going to open it up for questions at this point too, but there's a couple of other things I just want to reinforce, or ask Bridget to reinforce. So the first thing, Bridget, and these are process steps. The first is that you mentioned the very important sort of 2-step process, right? So I will transfer, 1% of my business to the new female owner. And then we take it to committee through the material change process, and then the next thing that happens is that the whole thing is transferred. That can obviously all be done in a year if you start it early enough, and it doesn't even have to be that early, right? So if you're trying to get it all done in a given year, that can be done. The second issue, though, Bridget, is if I do that, let's just say that I've transferred 1% to my niece Danny, and she knows about the business and all that, and it goes into committee and the committee approves it. And then I sell the rest of it to Danny and then also my nephew, Ethan. And so Danny owns 60% and Ethan owns 40% of it. But at that point, it turns out actually my bylaws have this supermajority requirement, which didn't matter before. When I owned 100% of it, it didn't matter, but now it matters. So then what happens, Bridget, if I'm still certified at that point?
If you're still certified and this can happen, and it does happen even without an ownership change. Sometimes you make a change in your governance and you don't really think about it, and then you are up for recertification. And as we're reviewing your application, we see something and we're like, uh-oh, this really isn't compliant, but you're certified with us. So what we would do at that point, or what WeBank allows us to do at that point, as really a courtesy to our applicants, is to send a 60-day letter. What that means is that we're not going to deny right away saying, because you just changed this, you no longer are able to have the certification. We're just going to, deny you. We send you the letter. We say, hey, listen, either we missed this before or there's been a change, but here's the section that right now doesn't really comply. So, and then we give the applicant 60 days to make the change and send it back to us and just say, okay, here's this change, we've made it, and then we will proceed with the process of recertification. So anytime you are recertified with us, I mean, you're fine. But if there's a change that we see, and whether we missed it from the beginning or it was something that you made, we will allow you to fix it.
But
Which,
again, that does require that we stay certified. So if I had this situation where I own 100% of the business and I don't go through the two-step process, I just sell it tomorrow, Danny gets 60 and Ethan gets 40. And there's a problem, then first of all, Danny's going to have to come through and get certified brand new, which is inconvenient. But then if the document says, is a problem, because of control of some type, then we're going to deny it, right?
right, yes.
And and I'm going to say, or Danny's going to say, but Aunt Karen's company had the same thing and everything was good. And we're going to say, yeah, but it was fine when it was 100% woman owned.
Right.
One of the other things, and this is actually, partly this is certification related, but partly it's just kind of related to some of the other topics that we've talked about in the series, and just the importance of knowing what your goals are, right, in terms of retirement and transition of the business. What do I want to have happen next? Why am I selling the business, or why am I retiring, or what, all of that. We had I just recall getting a call one day from a woman, and she owned 100% of it. It was an electrical business, and she wanted her daughter-in-law to take over the business. But the daughter-in-law at that point had really no particular involvement in the business. I mean, a little bit, but not much. But this woman we were having this conversation early enough that the woman was able to bring the daughter-in-law into the business and essentially train her for, a couple of years. I mean, this wasn't a 60-day process. So that this woman was able to run the business, right? I mean, and so that was obviously helpful from a certification point of view, because it allowed us to know that the new owner was, actually running the business. But it also, set the business up for success, right? If I just turn the business over lock, stock, and barrel to somebody, they may want to do a good job, but how are they going to know what to do if they've not been working in the business, right? So that's another thing that can be, I think, helpful, right, to think about. So
Absolutely.
yeah, because we do, to Bridget's point, we look at the resumes of the new people. Bridget, we talked about ESOPs last week. And so what is the procedure for for ESOP with certification? How does that work?
Well, if someone is turning into an ESOP, or so letting their employees have ownership, what they would need to do is they need to provide to us a list of all of the owners and what percentage all of the owners have, and we would need 51% of those percentages to be female.
Yeah.
And then every year, because that could change, every year they need to provide that for us.
So that can be kind of because it's not just the names of the people,
No.
right? We need to see,
Right.
government ID or proof of citizenship, or what have you.
Yes. Oh, that's true. I missed,
Mhm.
and they would have to. They don't have to provide that every year unless there's a new person added. But
Mhm.
initially, they would need to provide proof of
Yeah.
citizenship for those 51%.
Yeah. And then also the person who is the trustee of the ESOP trust needs to be female also. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be an employee, obviously. It could be the former CEO, but it could be just a woman who, sometimes we see people who have that as their business, is that they're sort of ESOP trustees. Right. Yeah. And then the other thing to keep in mind with just ownership in general is that if a company is WOSB, right, which is the federal government certification, there are a couple of other more restrictive things with that. And so everything Bridget's been talking about is in the concept of or context of WeBank. So Bridget, can an ESOP own a WOSB company? No, right?
No, 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 no. Well,
And she was like,
your
wait,
question was,
you know
can
the
an
answer to that?
ESOP,
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
does it, okay,
right.
does a
It's not
company
allowed,
that has
yeah.
an ESOP? Yes, no,
Yeah.
no, okay.
Right, right. Sorry, no, I knew with the minute you looked away, it's like, oh dear, she didn't get how I was asking it. Sorry, yeah. So right, it's no. So WOSB requires that what they call direct ownership, which means,
Yes,
that Bridget Foster has to be the owner of the stock of the
yeah,
company. She can't have like
right,
Foster LLC holding company that owns.
right. Yeah, no holding companies, because,
Yeah,
whereas with
always says.
WeBank, we would look at that, but an holding company can own an applying company. We would ask questions on, whereas with for the WOSB, that
Right.
is not the case.
Right. And then similarly, I mean, well, with any kind of, so we had a situation where we had 4 women own a company, each 25%. One of them owned it through some kind of, one person LLC. I mean, she just, whatever, we'll just call it Goldner LLC. And they were WOSB certified as well as WeBank certified. So 2 of the women were bought out. And so then it was like 60% the Goldner LLC company, and then 40% this other person, another woman. And so we recertified them easily for WeBank. That was fine. But they did not qualify anymore for the WOSB because 51% of the company was owned through an indirect
Yeah,
holding
and
company.
one
Yeah.
other difference with WSB is where with WeBank, we would accept a permanent resident, like to show that they're a permanent
Green
resident.
card holder. Mhm.
And whereas with the WOSB, that is not the case. You need to be a US citizen.
Right. So yeah, so depending on who you're selling the business to, that could be potentially an issue. So um this gets complicated, and you know, everybody wants to make sure that their own circumstance is covered, which is appropriate. So I think what I would do, I mean, if anybody has any questions, they're welcome to either come off mute or put them in the chat. But also just to reinforce that if you think you're going to be, well, if you're thinking about, transitioning your business, then let's have that conversation sooner than later. And we can just, have a phone call or a quick Zoom, and you can say, well, these are the things I'm thinking about. And we have those conversations all the time, and can help, get you, it's like, well, these 4 options are fine. This option over here wouldn't work, whatever. And you guys can then decide. And it really comes back to Bridget's point, which is how important is that certification in your business. It is a consideration. We obviously want everyone to stay certified forever because, that's what we do. But we recognize that there's lots of considerations that you have when you are harvesting wealth from your business. And so we want to just make sure that whatever decisions you make, you're making them with the full information that you need to make this as smooth as possible for you. So, okay, well, it doesn't sound like there's any other questions. Bridget, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
For taking the time to share your expertise with us. And Jenny, thank you again for taking the time. And I will just wish everyone a happy rest of their afternoon. Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.